for this week, the Uber Cordero Show, whose goal is to enlighten the masses by bringing crucial conversations about divergent issues, and making it accessible to the people and those who are interested in these kind of topics. Today, our guest is Dr. Lana Shehadeh. She's a Palestinian scholar, thinker, who is also happens to be American, and she'll be talking to us about her life living and uh, surviving in Palestinian authority or Palestinian territories, and also about being a mom and a scholar in this area. So it'll be interesting to hear from her. Uh, Lana is a friend of mine. We went to school together at Florida International University, and this is all part of catching up with one another. So I hope you'll be excited to join with us. Welcome, Lana.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Uba.
Yes, I'm just really amazed by your choice to, relocate from Florida and move to to the Palestine and do work there as a professor. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about what led you to make this decision and how life has been there and where you teach and what you teach, all kind of stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, just like you said, Uba, I'm an American. I was born and raised in the U.S. And basically, I'm from Miami, Florida, which is where we went to school, and that's where I
Yes.
met Uba. Um, if you remember, during our PhD studies, COVID hit, and it got really bad. We had lockdown after lockdown. Nothing was clear. And I was in the midst of writing my dissertation, and a lot of the field work I was supposed to do in different parts of the Middle East was canceled time and time again. So I was, as a scholar, I was getting frustrated with not being able to access the Middle East. And then also as a mother, I was frustrated with the school system. Everything kind of crumbled together. So I was able to get in touch with a faculty member at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, which is
Mm.
under what we would, call Israel proper. Um, and this scholar basically invited me to do my field research in Palestine, and that way I could finish writing my dissertation. Um, COVID had basically caused a ruckus all over the world, right? So everything was on lockdown, including ports and borders. So it was very difficult for me to even enter Palestine. Um, I ended up getting a special permit to enter through the El Lid airport, or what others would call Tel Aviv airport, located in Israel proper. I'll use those quotes and I'll explain them later. And so even the airport was locked down, but we had been given a special permit to enter, and I was able to enter with the kids. This was summer of 2020, and I was able to finish my field research. I did all my interviews, wrote out my dissertation, and at the time we were defending our dissertations via Zoom, which I'm sure you remember. Um, it was a pretty bold decision to move back. As a Palestinian American, I felt very out of touch living in Florida. I obviously wear the hijab. My background is very different than most people in Florida. So I felt like I wanted to give my children a little bit of a different upbringing so that they don't feel like an alien to some extent. So I was able to bring them here. My oldest daughter, Lily, started first grade in Palestine. So she's speaking fluent Arabic and English. Obviously, at home, we speak English. And my younger one is speaking Arabic, reading and writing. So, selfishly, I really enjoy seeing that they're becoming fluent in another language. And then from an academic point of view, I have real life experience on the ground. I'm able to do a lot of my research. So it's been really great. I've been here since summer of 2020, and we're approaching summer of 2023 now. So in June it'll be 3 years.
Yeah, I think that was a really bold decision. I remember we had a small conversation, I think via Facebook, over you deciding to do that research. And personally, I was a little hesitant because I was like, this is bold. I mean, we are in a pandemic. There was stuff happening in Palestine. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I think that a lot of people at the school also thought that it wasn't really like
I
a
mean,
yeah,
specifically my major professor, Eric Loeb, was like, "What are you doing?"
yeah,
Miss Wahi and everybody was very worried, more so than anything else, right? My professors and all of you had met my children on campus, if you remember. So
very beautiful
everybody,
thought. Yeah.
yeah, thank you. Everyone kind of like we knew each other very well. So I think everyone was worried for our safety more so than anything else. But surprisingly, it's been great. It's been very fulfilling professionally, but it's been very fulfilling spiritually, honestly. Just opening my so I live on the sixth floor of a building
Mm,
in a town just north of Ramallah city. But I'm in a
mm.
town, village slash town. And the interesting thing, Uba, is my apartment, if you go open my kitchen window, you will overlook mountains and what we call the Iltifafi, which is an Israeli settler road, because to the left of me is Area C, completely controlled by Israel, and you are not allowed to build or harvest the land as a Palestinian. So it's pretty bare, and all you can see is the settler road. On my right hand side is Area B, and we actually have a developed refugee camp in the middle of the town. Who is living in this refugee camp? These are Palestinian refugees who exited Gaza and an area called El Lid in 1967, and they settled in what was previously a Jordanian military base. It's been transferred into a refugee camp. So even for my kids and myself, it's very enriching, and it's very odd. It's a very odd sense of reality being here, because I can explain it for hours to you, but it's completely different when you're on the ground.
Yeah, I understand. So one of I understand what you're talking about. I'm not feeling it because I'm not three-dimensionally present there. But it's a heavy topic, and I want to know how you're grappling with it as a Palestinian, and especially how your experience compares with some of those Palestinians who maybe might not have a U.S. passport. You haven't.
Right.
Yes.
Well, that's key what you said, Uba. I have an exit out, right? Any point in time, I get fed up with life here, I book my ticket and I'm out, right? But most people are stuck here. Specifically for me, literally sitting on this dining room table and looking at the refugee camp. I mean, these are people who not only don't have an American passport or a European passport, they also don't have proper Palestinian paperwork, right? Because they're considered stateless. They are not fully officially under the Palestinian Authority, nor are they under an Israeli state. So I think for me, yes, I get affected by the occupation. Yes, when there's a checkpoint, my schedule is disrupted. When the Israeli military enters, we're a bit scared, and my kids, and I'm worried about that. But in the end of the day, as much as I believe that I'm part of the struggle, I'm a privileged member of this society who really tends to have an observer point of view because I'm not, engulfed in it. So, and I remind myself that, I remind my kids of our privilege. Um, but yeah, it's worrisome. So, like I explained, we're in a town just north of Ramallah. We actually neighbor one of the very large Israeli settlements called Ofra.
Yeah.
Palestinians, their water, for example, our water is controlled by Israel, right? So our water is cut off for 4 days out of the week. So the 3 days that it's on, you hope that your water tanks on the rooftop are filled up to hold you up for the rest of the week, which is fine in the winter because it rains a lot and you're not using as much water as you are during the summer. But in the summer, our water cuts all the time. We have lots of issues with water, but we neighbor a very large Israeli settlement that you can kind of peek over. Obviously, behind these large walls, there are children swimming in water, right? This is a privilege. Okay. When you have enough water to fill up a swimming pool, as much as that's trivial to somebody living in Miami, Florida, it's a luxury here, because water is a hot commodity and you don't always have access to it. So living in this town, it's really given me a sense of what the struggle is like. It's apartheid at its finest, and it's really held out for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, some like access to water. If you compare with apartheid in South Africa, that was one of the things. Access to space, access to water, access to social amenities, school systems, and so those disempowering aspects that are present in a society, you live through that every day. In the case of Palestinians and the Israelis.
Yeah, of course.
And yeah, and to say this is not to say like my positionality on this is I'm an observer, so I'm not really invested in even though as much as I empathetic with both sides, the when you examine the consequences of these policies on people, that's when you see what they get at, right?
Yeah, I think that's key, really, seeing
Mm-hmm.
the consequences of these policies. For an academic like myself, even access to Israeli academic institutions. Hebrew University is a place that I was closely involved with when I first came here. But now that I'm involved with a Palestinian university, access to Jerusalem is very difficult for me, but even though I have an American citizenship. So the moment you enter Israeli soil
Mm.
as an individual with a Palestinian ID, which I do have, it trumps your American passport. So if I were, God forbid, to get imprisoned by the Israeli army, to have any issues, I'm not protected by the American consulate, because the moment you enter Israeli soil, you're considered Palestinian. I have a Palestinian ID card. So I am barred from entering Jerusalem. I'm barred from entering Israel proper. And I'm really restricted to certain municipalities in the Palestinian territories.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow, this is and ordinarily we think that the American passport is kind of like the top thing you want document you want to have, but in your
Yeah.
case not, right?
Not here, not here. Even when I travel, right? So they were able to get me a special permit for once, right, to enter the Israeli airport. But generally, whenever I come to the US, my kids and myself are not allowed to enter or exit through an Israeli airport, right? Because we are a security threat. So instead, we have to cross the border by land into Jordan, and then we're able to travel from the Jordanian airport. We are not allowed to use Israeli facilities like their airports, their universities, their libraries. This is why I think the general public doesn't fully understand why we call it an apartheid state. But when you talk about South Africa and this inaccessibility of certain facilities for Black people, I mean, that's how it is for Palestinians. We're not allowed to enter Jerusalem unless you apply for a specific permit. In order to get that specific permit, your fingerprints are taken, pictures, background check, and you after that long process, you're given 6 hours, a 1 day permit for 6 hours to enter and exit. Right. So but that's not the case for an Israeli. Any Israeli at any point in time are able to enter my town, Silwad, Ramallah, whatever area they want. They're advised not to, because Palestinians are security threats to you, but they're allowed in and out as they please. They want to go to Jordan through the land border, they're able to use the Palestinian land border as they please.
Hmm.
Right? So
Yeah, it's so much
it
so
is.
much like South Africa in many ways, except yeah, the history is a little different, but the
Yeah,
consequences of policies are very similar, eerily similar, if I must say.
yeah,
Well, now let's talk about your dissertation research. It's one of those dissertation research that I really liked, and I was so glad to be able to hear you present it. But I want you to distill it to the public so they can understand what was the gist of it, and what its implications are.
yeah. So my research generally, and even until today, is that I look at the role the religious authority plays in executing and maybe popularizing state policies. Um, During my dissertation, I looked at the Gulf states more specifically, but now I'm looking at really this intersection of religion and politics, even in Palestine. Right now, I'm looking personally at the role religion plays in the Palestinian political perception of the future. So I look at why is it that certain Palestinians are hopeful about a future for Palestine? Does religion play a part? Is it that leap of faith that pushes people to be politically hopeful? But during my dissertation, I was actually looking at how does the religious authority or the clerisy use their platform to popularize state policies. So I looked at Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates as a sample of the Gulf Arab states. And I specifically did a mixed methods research. I looked at the qualitative data that I was able to gather from religious sermons popularized through state television broadcasting, as well as radio shows and mosque sermons. And I basically translated them from Arabic to English.
Mm,
And I analyzed them throughout specific themes. I looked at like different political junctures in that state's history. So for Saudi Arabia, I looked at basically legitimizing the state or the authority, right? Respecting authority. And that's a big thing in the Arab world. And actually, Uba, this is something you see all over the Middle East. Um, uh, Mosques are used to really hone in on this political authority and really showing the population how important, as a religious Muslim, it is for you to be a devout citizen of the state. And
mm,
so Saudi Arabia worked very hard on that, and so did the UAE. And I would argue right now that's being done in Jordan. If you guys are keeping up with the news in Jordan, at one point there was a fear of a coup, and so a lot of the religious sermons that are broadcasted on Fridays through the mosques talk about this importance of respecting authority, respecting your ruler, and really making sure that you show allegiance to the ruler. That's part of being a good mu'min. Mu'min means a good believer in Islam, right? So I looked at that. I also looked at the different phase of introduction of sectarianism in the Gulf states. So during the Arab Spring, we heard about this clash between Sunnis and Shia. And so sectarianism became a big part of the state policies in Saudi Arabia. And it was very evident in the religious sermons that were presented on TV, but also at mosques. And then I concluded with this new era of Arab states normalizing relations with Israel. And this was probably the most interesting because what we started to see is that religious clerics all throughout the Arab world stopped um, referring to Israel as the enemy. The major enemy of the state became Iran and the Shia. And Israel and the people of Israel, which are Jews, are people of the book. They are our friends. They are our neighbors. You know, joining forces with Israel, it betters our state. It betters Islam. And so these were some of the things we heard in these sermons. So I analyzed them and looked at their effect on the quantitative data I also looked at, which is basically public opinion. What people had to say. I was able to get some raw data from Saudi Arabia and analyze it with the qualitative data I had collected.
mm. So if very interesting research. So what if people of the Jewish religion are our people of the book, so like Sunnis and or the other dominant Islamic sects. Where does that leave the Iranians and the Persian and the Shiites?
Yeah. It's really interesting. So this became very controversial in the Muslim world in
Mm,
2019 after the UAE announced their prospect of normalizing relations with Israel shortly after a sermon in Mecca. So, like the sermons in Mecca, Uba, are considered really prime data for anyone doing research on Islam and religion in the Arab world. It is
mm,
one of the most influential sermons that take place all over the Islamic world. And a well known cleric by the name of Abdurrahman al Sudaisi
mm,
executed this sermon. And in it, he referred to Jews as the people of the book. He didn't use the word Israel at all, but he did say that we as Muslims are advised by our prophet and by our book that we must be in line with people of the book, and these are our brothers and sisters, and they are not the true heretics or infidels. Rather, the infidels are the people who were introduced to the truth, Sunni Islam, and instead chose another path, Shia Islam. So he used very indirect messages in his sermon. It was considered one of the most controversial sermons in in the 21st century because he, in a very
mm.
indirect, creative way, pushed for normalization of relations with Israel, which is unheard of in the Arab world and it's frowned upon, and really waging war against Iran very indirectly. If we go back to the 1950s and we look at the king of Saudi Arabia, King Faisal, he basically, and I, even in my dissertation, I said King Faisal at this sermon is probably twisting and turning in his grave, right? King Faisal was monumentally known for really standing his ground against any form of normalization of relations with Israel. He was at the forefront of the 1973 oil embargo against the US and Israel, right, in support of the Palestinian cause. And this was a Saudi Arabian king. Yet now we have the Saudi Arabian government really tiptoeing closer and closer to this idea of normalizing relations and out front and very abruptly waging war against Iran, which is a neighboring Middle Eastern country. Yeah.
Very interesting thing. I wanna. I know a little, not enough. I'm teaching a class now on Middle East and North African politics, and for teaching the class, I have to read a heck lot about these regions. And one of
Yeah.
the things that I'm starting to realize that the someone you're talking about from make those creative in dog whistling narratives about familial connections between Arabs and Jews, right? In general, uh, not I'm just refreshing your eyes, so I might be wrong. Uh,
Mm.
while at the same time othering the Persians as kind of like another group, right? That are
Yeah.
infiltrated Islam and kind of captured it,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
where does this leave the Palestinian cause?
That's the thing. In I would say in the 1970s, in the
Mm,
1960s, in the 1970s, up until the mid 1980s, the Arabs spoke on behalf of the Palestinians, right? It wasn't until the late 1980s did we see Palestinians really speak up. And that's where we had that first intifada, right? The first civil disobedience of the Palestinian people. And the Oslo Accords, as horrific as it is in terms of the realities on the ground and the fact that Yasser Arafat went ahead and signed a paper that his people were completely against, the powerful part about it is that it was the first time Palestinians represented themselves on the table, right? And so for a little while, Palestinians were in the equation, right? And they were at the forefront of the equation, leading their Arab brothers behind. Once we got closer and closer to the normalization deal between the UAE and Israel, Palestinians were completely excluded from the formula. And lots of propaganda. Anyone who keeps up with social media, specifically in 2019, 2020, 2021, you would basically see that even citizens of these countries, um, even citizens of these countries, uh, were basically saying we're sick of the Palestinian cause. This is not our cause to fight. Israel is not our enemy. Israel did nothing to us. You would hear this kind of rhetoric through different media outlets. So I would say now we've just stepped 10, 15 steps behind by really excluding Palestinians from the negotiations table.
So this idea of pan-Arabic sentiments that were common in the 60s now and the 70s, NASA and Saddam and all this this is dead.
I would say it is dead.
Mm.
Even Nasser, really, and this may be very interesting for you for your Middle East politics class. It's really interesting to read the perspective of Egyptians on Nasser and the Nasser era, right, 1953 till the early 1960s. And you ask any Palestinian, and they will. I mean, Nasser was one of the most popular names for years and years. He was he was the role model for Palestinians. He fought for Palestinian rights, right? But really, what you saw him doing on the ground is populism 101, right? Really excluding and othering members of the Egyptian society, specifically the Muslim Brotherhood, um, any organization that was outside of the Free Officers Union. You know, you know, he led a pan-Arab movement as long as that movement was led by him. And really, that's where I think you and I probably know that because we do a lot of reading on this. But I think that the general Arab public doesn't see it like that. He till this day, I hear Palestinians talk about him like, Sakalla ayyam Nasser. Oh, those good old days when Nasser was around. He
He was the
was
helper.
yeah, 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 yeah. He was the warrior who really defended Palestinians.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. Very. So one last thing that I'm interested in that I had in your presentation last time you talk about this dissertation, your dissertation. It is this idea of Saudi Arabization of Islam as it contrasts to militarization of Islam.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you unpack that a little bit? Hmm?
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up. So I would say after this normalization deal that the UAE conducted with Israel, they had an image to protect and an image to really refine, specifically in the Arab world, but I would say uh, globally. And it was this image of tolerance, right? This
Mm,
idea that Dubai and the United Arab Emirates is really the country of tolerance in which people of all walks of life are welcome. And that's really why that's kind of the push that they had to normalize relations with Israel, because nobody should be excluded from the equation, right? Um, they led this idea of a very moderate version of Islam, right? The version that really does them well. And the key word in that was tolerance. It was
totally.
really this idea of, yeah, tolerance. Um, while Saudi Arabia really did a very different thing. So Saudi Arabia, as much as they tried to refine their image, and specifically during the MBS era, I think it was back in graduate school days when we heard about the Khashoggi scandal, right? And as much as MBS tried to revolutionized Saudi Arabia. You know, women were all of a sudden allowed to drive, and there's concerts being introduced into Riyadh and Mecca. Uh, American hip hop and R&B and rap artists were allowed into Saudi Arabia to conduct concerts and the like. As much as he was trying to really follow in the footsteps of the UAE, he got caught up in a few scandals where it reminded us of this Wahhabi, very like security state identity that Saudi Arabia has had for a very long time, and it's a very like ruling with the iron sword, right? In 2011, we witnessed the execution of Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, who's a Shia cleric, a very popular Shia cleric who was considered a very peace-loving cleric who never called for any form of revolution or coup. He was executed in 2011 along with 8 members of his mosque. Shortly after that, we heard about the Khashoggi scandal. Anyone who dares to criticize the Saudi state will face the wrath of MBS. And whether, as much as he tried to refine that image, you know, the reality on the ground was very different.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think those two iteration of those state, the way the states morph and change their identity is very interesting. But I want to ask you a question about being an Arab woman in academia. First, being a woman, and then being an Arab Muslim woman in academia. How is that? How do you teach? And how? I forgot to ask you to tell the audience this where you are, a position right now. So you
Yeah.
might tell us that, and how the academic environment in Palestine differs from how is it, for example, in Florida.
Yeah. So
Mm,
I'm currently an assistant professor at the Arab American University of Palestine.
yes.
Um, so the education system here is very different than in Palestine than in Florida. First and foremost, undergrad classes, as much as we push for them to be taught in English, a lot of them are taught in Arabic. So I'm forced to use my Arabic. My Arabic is decent, but it's not great. It's not at that academic level when you want to, you know, it's not like it is in English. So a lot of my BA courses are taught in Arabic, which is very odd for me.
Mm,
And then on the graduate level, no, I get to teach in English. I think for me, the biggest difference really has been the student population. I've noticed undergrads in Palestine are obviously very political, right? Very
mm,
nationalistic. These were people born and raised under occupation. A lot of them live in villages and experience occupation on a daily level, right? So they're a little more engaged than American students are in terms of political discourse. In Florida, we're a bit hampered in the fact that a lot of our student population are very diverse. So I've had students at FIU coming from areas like Colombia and Honduras, Iran, uh, Saudi Arabia, Syria, different parts of Africa, Asia. So some of them have been very politically driven and able to like just, you know, discuss different political issues, but a lot of the student population, you know, does not discuss these things, and in many cases are a bit unaware of what's going on in the world, and it's just a result of living in the US. Here, no, people are very politically driven, and and there's a lot of obstacles to coming to campus every day, right? So when uh, the burning of the homes in Hawara, so about a week ago, Israeli settlers entered the town of Hawara and burned 300 Palestinian homes. This created a lot of chaos. Not necessarily checkpoints, but Palestinians were scared to leave their homes. So this interrupts with your day-to-day life teaching at a university, right? That's something we never experience in the US, right? We have experienced in Florida the, you know, school shootings and things like that, but it's not as common as things are here.
Mm.
In terms of being an Arab woman in academia, um, I want to try to say this as gentle as I can. So in the US, in the US, I do think that there is a lot of concentration on Caucasian men in academia. They tend to have more roles, right? It's just part of the equation. So as a Arab woman entering academia, I always felt a little bit prejudged. Let me take a break, Uba, and let me just grab some water.
Okay, cool. Mm.
Sorry about that. I
No,
hope you're
it's
able to
fine. Yeah,
get
yeah.
out. So as an Arab woman in academia, at least in the US, I always felt a bit prejudged, right? Especially when you go to conferences. At FIU, everyone's so nice, they already know me, so I've never felt that. But when you go to a conference, right, and you're going up to the table and people are looking at you, and then they hear you speak English and they're like, "Oh wow, where'd you learn your English? It's great." I'm like, ESL classes on campus. I don't even know what to respond.
Okay.
But these are common issues in the US that you just grow accustomed to it because you live there for so long. But I don't know why it always irritated me. I think also wearing the hijab, it's like a double whammy, right? There's whether you like it or not, they're going to label you. So some people are always really, really nice and curious. Others are, unintentionally but passive aggressively insulting when they're, congratulating you on your good English or your ability to read well and do research. So that's been my general experience. I don't think everybody has that experience. There are lots of Arab women in academia in the US, and lots of which have great, great positions in Ivy League universities. And I'm sure they've had a great experience, but my personal experience was a bit different. So for me, it's been kind of nice living somewhere where you're not like stared at and like people are like spooked by you. It's nice to just kind of lay low and fit in for a bit. So I've been enjoying this.
Mm. And the
Yeah,
students are responsive and they're respectful and they want to learn from you.
very much so. I think I would say at AAUP and then at FIU as well. I've had a very similar experience with the students. Students are always very respectful. They're very interested in learning from you, but also learning about your own experience. And I've noticed more so even at FIU. Anytime I've taught classes, whether in person or online, students were always very curious about my experience as a Palestinian American. And they were always very, very respectful, which is something I always appreciate.
Mm.
Um, Being curious and inquisitive is a great thing. So I always encourage students to ask. No, there's no question that's insulting. It's only insulting when you prejudge people. But as long as you're curious and inquisitive, I think people are always happy to answer and share their experiences.
I think I
Yeah,
share the same sentiments, you know.
right.
Yeah, I do. Our students are curious. They want to learn. They engage. They listen to this perspective. Often, some of them come with a lot of ignorance, but that easily fades away
Easily.
when yeah. So it's nice. But what about being a mom in academia?
I think that's probably the hardest part. And I would say that's harder than any other hat that I wear. And recently, since I've moved here, it's been even harder, right? Because, you're supposed to be attending these academic conferences and you should be going giving talks and you need to travel. I have two little girls and my husband's back and forth, so he's not with us all the time. So I've been missing lots of conferences. I've been trying to attend virtual conferences more so than any other conference. I think that's been the hardest part, and really also trying to do research, right? In academia, you don't go home and switch off, right? You don't get to leave your job and then you're engulfed in your home. You are still wearing that academic researcher hat and you're trying to figure out different topics you want to write about so that you could try to publish your next article. So as a mom, it's been a bit challenging, but I think once the kids are a little bit older, maybe it'll be easier to get around and attend conferences and the like.
I struggle with the same. I'm spending a lot of time away from my family, and it bothers me a lot. It bothers
Mhm.
me if it's really the right choice to make, you know. Um, but also it's, you're chartering new territory that people haven't seen or been there before, and
Of
those are
course.
the cost of it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And also academia is not very financially rewarding. So
Oh, it's
being
not.
away from family is just like you're like, the choice. It's tough.
Yeah.
Um, but it comes with the territory.
Yeah. I really like these conversations we're having. I mean, we could talk whole day about
Yeah.
different things, but I really want to thank you for your articulate response to questions that are very nuanced and respectful to either positions while not sacrificing the reality on the ground in Palestine and being a woman in academia and all that. You've done really well, and I'm
Thank
really,
you.
really grateful for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for talking to me. This has been great. It's been great to catch up with you.
Yeah, so we should do this one more time again, talk about something
Definitely.
else. All right.
Definitely. I'd be glad
All right.
to.
All right. Thank
Take
you
care.
so much, Dr. Lana Shehadeh, and have a
Yeah.
good evening in Ramallah, next to Ramallah.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's what time is it now there?
It is almost 8 p.m.
Oh wow. Oh, okay. It's about 7 to it's about 11 in the AM. So all right.
Yeah.
Have a good evening and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much. Take care, Uba.
Bye
Bye.
bye.